back to the over to the fun now. So, first question I have for Kim, who was the host. You're the host over there.
Yes, I was the host in that at my house there.
Yeah. And yeah, big fun. And how did you get into brewing? And
Probably it was like 2010. I was living in Alaska at the time, and I was working a kind of a week-on, week-off schedule. So I would have a week brew and then let it ferment for a week. Anyway, and how I got into it was just an interest in beer, and my theory was that I could probably make it cheaper than I was buying it.
okay. My fear would be I could make it cheaper, but could I make it drinkable?
Right. Well, that's the other thing too. So the progression of becoming a home brewer, typically everyone starts out with doing what they call extract brewing. And what that is you're with any making alcohol, you're turning sugar, yeast is eating the sugar, turning it, pooping out CO2 and alcohol.
Right.
That's the process. So the extract is basically we're starting with either liquid or dry processed grain already in the sugar.
Okay.
So it takes out a whole step and it makes it a little easier. But in doing that, you lose a lot of control of your flavors. So those beers, after you get a little bit of a palate, you can identify extract beers pretty quickly.
Okay.
They're not as good. So I did that for several years. Moved to Orlando, and I befriended a gentleman who had just opened a homebrew supply store. Okay. So I learned a lot from him. Finally started getting into all grain brewing, which is where you've got more control. You're actually doing a mash. That's where you're extracting the sugars from the grain, turning it into wort, sugar water that you ferment. A lot of the process. How I got into it was just a general interest of making my own beer.
That's awesome. And like I said, I studied wines. I had to learn a little bit about beer for my sommelier test, but never really dove into it. Got involved. I have friends who make it. I drink it, but as far as the process goes, I think a lot of people are always kind of like, how is it actually made? And
usually it's very intimidating, and people think it's very expensive. But it's not necessarily. You do need some equipment, sure, and then as time goes on, you just add a little bit here, add a little bit here, and then they say you have a whole room full of equipment.
I like that. That sounds fun. Now let's talk about IPAs, because when I went over there, I was just blown away. The list of IPAs, you had a smoked habanero, you had a chili mango lollipop IPA, Old Red IPA, Post Road IPA, Murata Way IPA, you had a wheat ale, a Cabernet, and then the Hobotten IPA. And I think, is there another one there? Then we went to the barley wine. And we're going to talk about barley wine in a minute, because I hooked a lot of people out there with the wine term, saying we got barley wine. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But my question is, with hops. I mean, hops is, you talked a little bit about malt, hops, getting some beers are malty, and they're richer and smoother and sweeter, I'd say, in flavor. And then you got the hop that gives it the bitter. Right. But how do you make a red chili mango lollipop IPA?
Well, let's first talk about a little, the supposed history of IPA, Indian Pale Ale. So they say, and some people think this is a kind of a myth, but you can research it yourself. But back in the day, even they were trying to get beer when they were taking over India, when they were colonizing India. And on those ships, beer in very warm, sloshy places did not do very well. So when the beer got there, it basically turned bad. So what they did was they increased the alcohol, which that helps with preservation. Okay. And actually, hops is a natural preservative to a degree as well. Okay. So when we brew beer, one of the number one things we try to do is make sure everything's clean, sanitized. Sure. But we don't have to worry about the hops, because they're perfect.
Sure.
doing that themselves. So they also increased the hops on the IPAs. When they got to India, they had a stronger alcohol content and a stronger hop profile. Very tasty, in my opinion. Some people don't like them, but that's kind of history. I personally like them. I was just drinking Keystone, just junk beer. And I was in the Anchorage Airport in Alaska, and they had a Cheers restaurant in it. And I ordered by chance. I said, well, I'm going to try the Samuel Adams. If you've ever had Samuel Adams Foster Lager, it is very hoppy beer. They don't call it an IPA, but it is very hoppy beer. And I
You
fell
want
in love
one
with the
side of
flavor.
fries for you
And
guys
there
to
was
share?
no going back from there. So I like IPAs. Every place I go, a brewery that most often will give you the alcohol, the ABV, alcohol by volume.
Yep.
Some will give you the IBU, and that is International Beer Unit. So I'll tell you how hoppy the beer is.
And that what ranges from what to what? So like 0 to
0 to, we made,
200, 500. How high does it go?
last year Craig and I made an IPA that was 148 IBU.
Okay.
Very high. Ideally, most beers are going to be, non-IPA are going to be 20 IBU. There's going to be some IBUs in there because all beers, one of the three ingredients is hops. Yeah, you got to have hops before you hops. So there will be some bittering to it, all beer to a degree, but IPAs are going to be 50, 60, 70, 80, 100. So depending on how you get it. And well, I don't know if you have a question on the brewing process.
You take the flavors and kind of like we were talking about earlier, we talked a little bit about different hops. So explain how different types of hops add different flavors. I mean, and what typically you would expect from, say, a Cascade hops or one of the ones that are used a lot.
Well, first off, let's talk about how hops are used. So typically they're used in the boil at various stages, various times.
Okay.
And then they're used in a lot of IPAs. They're used what we call dry hopping. So after it's fermenting done, we will add more dry hops.
Right.
Because they're not in the
And that
boil.
gives it an extra
That will
smack.
give them more. So let's talk about that. So the time period is you put typically it's a 60-minute boil.
You doing okay?
You've already done your mash. You've got all the sugars extracted from your grains and the mash. Now you're going to a boil, and the first edition of hops, they're going to be sitting in your boil for an hour.
Okay.
And that's going to draw out a lot more, the most amount of oils from that hop. Okay. That gives you your bitterness. Okay. And then the next one, typically you've got maybe 10, 20 minutes left, somewhere in that area left in the boil. Then you'll add the flavoring hops. So it's going to extract a certain amount of oil from that boil. It's only going to be in there for 20 minutes rather than 60.
Got it.
And then you typically might add another amount of hops, add 2 minutes, 1 minute, flame out, and that's going to give you the aroma of hops.
Got it. So I was wrong. So it's not really the bitterness that's going in dry. It's actually the aromas and the nuances that you're getting in your beer. So if you're getting good one to describe, I mean, sometimes it's floral notes, sometimes it's it could be a lot of different. It could be pineapple. I mean, I don't know.
I think people, I'm trying to remember, there's one specific, I can't remember, one very, grapefruit.
Grapefruit, okay.
People describe a real aroma hoppy IPA as grapefruit a lot. And that's without
And that
even
comes from more the dry hopping than
the
the.
dry hopping and the aroma hopping. Some of the flavor hopping as well.
Okay.
So then to get into your question, hops will have different, they call it alpha acids.
Okay.
It's just a number that says, and the higher the alpha acids, the more bitterness the hop will be. So if I want a bitter hop, I will choose. And I'm not, Craig is more of an expert on this than I am. But like, let's say a mosaic, that's going to be a bittering hop.
Okay.
Alpha acids are higher. And then for more of an aroma hop, I'll go with a lower alpha acid. or if I'm doing like one of the beers, the white wheat.
Okay.
Very, very simple beer. Very little hop, very little, you weren't trying to do a whole lot on that, just making it very
That was very good.
It was definitely one of the favorites.
I had to like cut down my portions because they had 20 different selections, and I kept wanting to drink an entire beer of each, and that would have really put me in a
Yeah,
bad
that
way.
was a good day. Good day for everybody. That's a party. So to answer your question on that, how you pick those? You do your research, figure out, okay, you need this hop, you need this hop. Usually it's in the amounts. A lot of times you use the same hop.
Okay.
And then vary the amount and the time it goes in the boil.
And it's kind of a learning process
Sure.
at that point. You're going, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to try. I did it last time for this amount. Now I'm going to add it in right towards the end.
Right.
Or maybe I need more rum or apple. Yeah.
And as homebrewers, especially when you start out, pretty much you're following a recipe. It's like cooking an omelet. You put in what they tell you, when they tell you to, and just go for it. And then as time goes on, the one thing about homebrewing, some purists who run the big microbrews are like, oh, you're not really brewing if you're homebrewing. It's absolutely out of it. Because even if you go follow a recipe, you go to get the ingredients for that recipe, and the homebrew shops typically won't have what you're looking for. So you're always substituting. So you're creating your own beer by default, because you're not. And it's never going to taste like the beer you're trying to make, But it's still going to be good beer. So yeah, and then there's also I've been using I don't know if I can throw out names. There's a bunch of apps that have basically computers on them.
They appreciate it when you give them some props.
I use Grainfather.
Okay. Grainfather, that's a fun name.
Yeah, but there's a bunch of them. And you plug in your hops, you plug in your grains, the amounts, plug in the amount of hops, the additions, when it goes in there, all kind of things, and it literally just tells you your information. It's like, all right, so if you're adding those hops, it's going to be, your IBUs are going to be this. You put in all these grains, your starting gravity is going to be here. It just gives you everything there. And it actually has a little thing that shows the color. Your beer should be about this color when it comes out. So
that's really amazing. That's really
makes
cool.
Makes it a lot easier. Before I got into that, I got never worried about the alcohol. I'm like, it doesn't matter.
Perfect.
But now the more I'm trying to create things, I'm like, okay, well, I can add more hops with a lower alpha acid, turn it into perform like a higher alpha acid. So you kind of adjust things like that.
Well, that's super fascinating.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like half science and half art. You know what I mean? I think it goes, similarly in winemaking. You have the same thing. You can have grapes from the same vineyard and get two wines that our neighboring vineyards are making that are very different styles. All right, now we're going to go into the wine part of this discussion, barley wine.
Barley wine.
So when I used to get a beer called the Elf beers. Are you familiar with those? There was
Haven't had many,
extremely bad Elf, extremely insane Elf, and they were put out around Christmas time, and they were high alcohol. And then the higher they got alcohol, and then the higher they got, finally they would get to barley wine.
Right.
And can you explain a little bit more about the ins and outs and when it becomes a barley wine? Is it a certain alcohol percent or a certain process?
It's mostly the process. So in brewing a beer, we talked about you get the wort, they call it wort, it's basically your sugar wort from the mash. And then you drain that wort out. And then typically you would sparge, which is basically you pour in a certain temperature of water, a certain amount of water over that grain to rinse the grain. Extract as much sugar as you possibly can before you get to the oil. You're making a barley wine, you get the initial, they call it a first running, you get the initial liquid that's in your grain out. And and you take that, it's going to be a smaller amount and very concentrated, and you boil that on its own.
Okay.
So since the sugars are concentrated, it's a smaller amount, it's concentrated. When you're done, you're going to have a higher alcohol.
Sure.
Beer, and it's because the alcohol is more in line with.
So basically, just not doing the rinsing is going to cause you to have more sugars, which is going to raise your alcohol.
You're not diluting the initial one. Sure. Is what you're doing. So yeah, so the alcohol content is closer to what you would expect from a wine, like 12%,
Yeah,
10, 12, 14%, things like that. So that's why they call it.
I've had a few of those where you're drinking a 16 ounce of those things, and it's like drinking a half bottle of wine. You know, so you get really.
That's why a lot of places that do barley wines, they serve them in.
They serve them in like a little chalice, like smaller than these.
Smaller than that, yeah, 5 ounce maybe. And here's something interesting on barley wine specifically. So in Alaska, they have a brewing beer fest they call the Great Alaska Beer and Barley Wine Festival.
Okay.
All right. So they're 3-4 day event, and they're giving out awards for everything. But the most coveted award is award for barley wine.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So you're at a beer fest, and everyone's got a barley wine.
Get the barley wine, they're going for the award.
And if they can get the award for the barley wine, they've done the best brewing they can.
That's awesome. Now tell me about, you had the barley wine there, and you had the side chick red ale. So I was laughing because I'm like, what's the side chick? And you explained it very clearly and very precisely. And I'll let
Yes, I named it the red-headed side chick. So basically you made your wort for your barley wine, so you've got all the initial sugar, your first run out, but you still got all the sugar that's still in the grain.
Right.
So now what I'm going to sparge, I'm going to rinse that grain, and what comes out is going to be another beer. And there's a couple of little tricks to, since there's not going to be as much sugar in it, it's usually going to be a very low alcohol beer.
Okay.
So more like a Pilsner or something like that. But one thing that you can do in your boil is add, ideally you want to add corn sugar. Yeah. And adding sugar, all that does in your mash, doesn't change the flavor unless you do way too much. It just increases your alcohol. That's all it does.
So it's really not changing the flavor because it's the straight sugar. It's being eaten all by the yeast.
All by the yeast, yeah. So it was a second running, a side chick.
That's awesome. I saw that. I was like, I'm not. Should I ask about this one? Yeah. I was like, we got a side chick
Go
here.
ask my girlfriend about it. She knows all about it. And it came out with a red hue. So red-headed side chick.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And
that was last year. We had that last year. Both the barley wine and the red-headed side chick were from last year's party. And I just saved enough. They're high enough alcohol concentration that they age fine. And they cracked a couple of them for this year's party.
awesome. That was a fantastic time. And again, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for all this knowledge. And I'm trying to put this together, and obviously those of you who are watching, and I'm recommending it, you want to learn more about whether you're in the industry, in hospitality business, or you're working in retail, or even as a sales rep selling beer and wine. This is the way to kind of get your knowledge up there. We're just talking to people who know and getting us there. I've learned a lot today, and I've been doing this for since I wasn't gray. So it's been a while, and that I've been studying this over 30 years. And it's just, I think it's fantastic to be able to learn more and more, and it just enhances your experience, and it makes life better. It's what it's all about. We're here for a little bit of a ride, and this gives us a chance to really enjoy it.
Enjoy our trips around the sun.
Exactly. Kim, thank you very much. Salute.
And
If I can mention one thing before you do that.
Yeah.
So all you Keys people, we're trying to start up the Upper Keys Brewers Society again. So you can go on Facebook and look up that, join. There's no membership fees or anything like that. We're just trying to get people that love brewing in the Keys, especially the Upper Keys, to get
Upper
brewing.
Keys Brewers. So I'll also post that out there, and I'll put it on some of my stuff so that we can get it out there. But yeah, that's fantastic. Upper Keys Brewers. Remember that. And obviously, for those of you who haven't been to the website yet, it's AGGC, a Grape Guy Consulting, aggc.info, not com, because we're trying to give you something to learn. And that's the way to remember it. And I'll see you soon, I think. And I'll definitely see you soon. Cheers again. Cheers again. All right, welcome back. We're actually taking a break from our spring wine series, and we got a chance to go to a homebrew. What was that? Is that an annual homebrew